Hello to all our friends, our well-wishers and dear ones. A warm, warm welcome to EDGE 2020. To those of us who are here for the first time, to those who don't know EdelGive that much, but have still chosen to join us and herein absorb and understand, a warm, warm welcome to EDGE 2020. For years now, EDGE has been that space where we came together to explore layers of philanthropy, of development. We came to listen, we came to absorb. But most importantly, it was that place where we just came together as a journey. We came together to learn. This year as we go digital, I'm very cognizant and the EdelGive team is very cognizant of the pressures of the virtual world on each one of you. And therefore, we are even more grateful for the time that you are choosing to spend with us. But before we begin, I'd like to invite you to engage with us as well through the chat and feedback portals visible on your screens. Also, follow us on social media to know more about what we do now and later as well. In one of the most disastrous years in many years and decades, we chose to host EDGE on the premise of hope. We've seen the worst times, we've seen deprivations, and we've seen exemplary behavior that made us believe in the power of humanity and hence hope. Many of us have lost so much: wealth, incomes, families, friends, dear ones. But there is a life and there is building. And as we live and build, there are important lessons to learn as well that we may never forget, we must never forget. Hence hope. This year, we chose to spread EDGE over 3 Thursday evenings, 3rd, which is today, 10th and 17th of December, on 3 different segments. On the 10th, we will explore education. On the 17th, we will speak of issues that women face in particular. But today, we dedicate to addressing the very critical and important issue of livelihoods, including the labor and migration issues the country is currently witness to. We will begin each day with including the primary stakeholders in our conversation. Each evening that you will join us, the first segment will be with the primary stakeholders. To begin our first segment today, we have Sarman Prajapati, who is a construction worker in the unorganized sector and who is joining us from Noida. He is one of those millions who walked back home to Damoh district in Madhya Pradesh with his family. And his voice today is very important as we even begin to talk about where do we go from here. Joining him is Gayatri Divecha, who heads corporate social responsibility for Godrej Industries and associate companies. And leading the conversation is Amit, who's a dear friend, but more importantly, a migration expert. Sarman will be speaking in Hindi, and for all our friends who have, we have English subtitles for your convenience. So I would like to place my thank here before I pass it on to Amit and Sarman and Gayatri. I want to also place my thanks to the Jan Sahas team who helped us communicate with Sarman, who facilitated this conversation, because we were really keen that this conversation cannot happen without him. The work of Jan Sahas and their work with migrants has been just truly inspirational. And with this, I hand over to Amit. Have a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Naghma, for this lovely introduction. I wanted to introduce Gayatri and Sarmanji to my panel. Gayatri, let me start with you. We know you are the head of CSR sustainability for the Godrej Industries Group. Just 2 words on yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Amit, and thanks, Naghma and EdelGive for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful platform. So like Amit said, I lead CSR for Godrej Industries Group and associate companies. A part of our work is building resilience for communities within our ecosystem. So through our value chain, as well as in surrounding areas to our manufacturing presence, in order to connect them to their entitlements and in order to ensure that they have a social safety net. We also do focus on other things like livelihoods, as well as watershed development and healthcare, particularly vector-borne diseases. But this year, with the pandemic and ensuing lockdowns, the kind of work we do on social protection has definitely been reinforced. So I'm glad to be a part of this conversation.
शुक्रिया गायत्री जी। सरमन जी, अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं, आप दमोह डिस्ट्रिक्ट से बिलोंग करते हैं, आप एक मिस्त्री हैं, अपने बारे में आप दो चार चीजें बताना चाहेंगे हमें, इससे पहले कि हम अपने सवाल पूछें?
पूछिए सर।
अच्छा, तो मैं डायरेक्टली सवाल पे आता हूँ फिर सरमन जी। सरमन जी, मुझे एक बात बताइए कि जब लॉकडाउन शुरू हुआ, जब लॉकडाउन अनाउंस हुआ, तब आप क्या कर रहे थे? लॉकडाउन से आपको क्या इफेक्ट हुआ इमीडिएटली?
हम लोग लॉकडाउन में यहीं पे अपनी झोपड़ियों में, जहाँ झुग्गी हमारी बनी है, यहीं पे रहते थे। हम लोग को ना तो बाहर निकलने मिल रहा था उस टाइम पे, और अगर मार्केटिंग करने भी जाते थे तो एक आदमी को बोलते थे खाली एक आदमी जाएगा बाहर, दूसरा आदमी साथ में भी नहीं जा सकता। और 20-25 आदमी थे हम लोग एक ही साथ, तो 20 आदमी का राशन पानी एक आदमी तो ला नहीं सकता था।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
कभी कभार एक आध आदमी को मिलता था जाने को। उस टाइम पे तो बहुत परेशान थे हम लोग, और यहाँ पे कोई मदद सहायता कोई भी नहीं कर रहा था उस टाइम।
तो आपने वापस जाने का डिसीजन कैसे लिया? और जब आपने लिया वापस जाने का डिसीजन, तो आपको किसी ने मदद किया, कोई सहायता करी सरकार या कंपनी की तरफ से?
मदद तो हमारे शायद भाई ने की थी, कुछ पैसे भी दिए थे और कुछ दिन खाना भी भिजवाए थे, 8-10 दिन, हफ्ता 10 दिन के लिए। फिर उसके बाद हमारे पास खाना राशन पानी के लिए पैसा नहीं था। फिर हम लोग सोचे कि चलो चलते हैं, जो भी होगा रास्ते में घर पहुंच जाएंगे। यहाँ का तो भरोसा नहीं, यहाँ तो इतना दिन किसी ने मदद नहीं करी है, और आगे चल के फिर भूखा थोड़ी मरेंगे। तो ज़्यादा ही परेशान हो गए, तभी यहाँ से निकले थे। कोशिश भर तो हम लोग 40 दिन यहाँ पे बिताए थे। 40 दिन जैसे भी बना ना, बाहर भी नहीं निकले। और उसके बाद फिर जब पैसा वैसा सब खत्म हो गया, फिर सोचे चलो अब चलते हैं घर पे, तभी निकले थे यहाँ से।
तो जो आपने जर्नी करी फिर वापस घर जाने के लिए, उसके बारे में थोड़ा बताइए, कैसे आप वापस पहुंचे घर तक?
यहाँ से सर हम लोग को है ना, दिन में तो निकलने नहीं मिल रहा था।
हाँ, तो आप नोएडा में थे, क्योंकि आप राजमिस्त्री हैं, आप नोएडा में काम कर रहे थे और आपको पहुंचना था दमोह डिस्ट्रिक्ट एमपी में।
हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
तो ये कैसे किया आपने? ये वाली जर्नी कैसे मैप करी आपने?
यहाँ से हम लोग दिन में निकलने नहीं मिल रहा था, हम लोग रात में यहाँ से निकले थे 10 बजे।
ओके।
तो 10 बजे यहाँ से निकले, रास्ते में जैसे कहीं चौकी पड़ती है, कोई पुलिस वाला रास्ते में मिलता है, तो उन्होंने अपना बचाव के लिए, जैसे हम लोग 30-35 आदमी थे, उन्होंने अपने बचाव के लिए हम लोग को इधर उधर रास्ता भटका दिया। तो हम लोग तो रास्ता का मालूम नहीं, जैसे बता दिया वैसे चलते गए। जो रास्ते पे हमको 8 घंटा लगना था, वहाँ पे हमको 24 घंटा लग गई। पूरी रात घूमे, पूरे दिन पैदल चलते चलते चप्पल जूते भी फट गए थे।
तो मतलब आप दिन में करीब 8-10 घंटे चल रहे थे? बिल्कुल। और फिर मतलब जब पुलिस ने थोड़ा आपको गुमराह किया, ये सब करने के बाद आप फिर कोई आपको बस मिली, ट्रक मिला, प्राइवेट गाड़ी मिली, कैसे आप आगे तक पहुंचे फिर? क्योंकि दमोह डिस्ट्रिक्ट तो बड़ा दूर है।
हम लोग को पुलिस वालों ने, जैसे पूरी रात तो हम लोग पैदल चले, पूरे दिन चले। फिर उसके बाद एक बॉर्डर पर हम लोग फंस गए, परी चौक बोलते हैं यहाँ पे,
ग्रेटर नोएडा में।
वहाँ पे बॉर्डर था। हाँ, जिले का बॉर्डर था। तो दूसरे जिले की वो उधर वाली पुलिस इधर नहीं जाने दे रही, और इधर वाली पुलिस उधर नहीं जाने दे रही। तो उधर हम लोग 4-5 घंटे जो है वहाँ पे रोड पे बैठे बैठे बिताए। फिर उसके बाद फिर 10-11 बजे रात में फिर पुलिस वालों ने एक ट्रक में घुसेड़ दी हम लोग को, कि अब यहाँ से निकलो नहीं तो मारेंगे। फिर घुसेड़ने के बाद फिर जब ट्रक वाला हम लोग को आगरा तक छोड़ा था, फिर उसने पैसे भी लिए हम लोग से।
ट्रक वाले ने पैसे भी लिए आपसे?
हाँ, पैसे भी लिए हम लोग से, 200-200 रुपये सबसे लिए थे। ये आगरा में पैसे भी ख़त्म हो गए हम लोग के। फिर वहाँ पे शायद भाई ने 6,000 रुपये भेजे थे मेरे अकाउंट में, तो फिर उसके जरिए हम लोग पहुँचे भिंड मुरैना। कि भिंड मुरैना कहीं वहाँ पे वो हमारे एमपी में पड़ता है। वहाँ तक पहुँचने के बाद फिर वहाँ से हमारा एमपी सरकार जो है वहाँ से बस लगी हुई थी हर जगह के लिए, जिसको जहाँ जाना है। तो फिर वहाँ से दमोह तक बस हम लोग को मिली। दमोह के बाद फिर हमारा जो
और
वहाँ का सरकार वहाँ हर जगह व्यवस्था कर रखा था ये बस की आने जाने की। तो उससे हम लोग घर पहुँचे।
एक और बात बताइए, जब आप गांव तक पहुंच गए, अब आपने इतनी सारी मुश्किलें झेल कर आप गांव तक पहुंच गए, गांव में क्या हाल था?
गांव में तो इतना बुरा हाल था जी कि हम लोग पहुंचते ही लोग हम लोग से इतना डरते थे कि जैसे हम कहीं चोरी करके आए हैं, मान लो बीमारी की वजह से। तो मतलब दूर दूर कोई भी किसी को मिलते थे ना रोड पे, जैसे हम लोग पैदल चल रहे हैं ना,
हम्म।
तो लोग दूर से ही भाग जाते थे देख के हम लोग को।
हम्म।
फिर इधर से जाने के बाद घर पे भी पहुंच गए। तो घर पे तो हमारे घर वालों ने अलग व्यवस्था कर दी थी, जो क्वारंटीन मतलब क्वारंटीन में 14 दिन बिताने थे। तो अपने हमारे घर के बगल में एक झोपड़ी बना दी थी हमारे मम्मी पापा ने। बाकी सरकार से कोई मदद नहीं मिली। घर जाने के बाद ना तो उन्होंने खाने पीने के लिए पूछा, ना कोई चेक करने आया, न किसी ने ये पूछा कि क्वारंटीन में है ये लोग, मतलब 14 दिन क्वारंटीन में रह रहे हैं कि घूम रहे हैं कि कुछ कर रहे हैं। हम लोग घर जाने के बाद 14 दिन खुद कहीं नहीं निकले, क्योंकि लोग वैसे ही हम लोग से उस टाइम पे डरते थे कि दिल्ली से आए हैं, ऐसा ना हो इनको बीमारी हो ये सब हो। तो हम लोग को खुद वैसे डर लगता था कि दूसरा आदमी हमसे घिन कर रहा है। तो इस वजह से हम लोग 14 दिन जो है अपना क्वारंटीन में बिताए। मम्मी पापा खाना भेज देते थे शाम को, सुबह में तो अपना वही झोपड़ी में खाते थे।
तो गांव में तो बड़े सारे आदमी या परिवार भी पलायन करते होंगे, और वो अभी सब घूम घुमा के वापस पहुंचे होंगे, तो
उस टाइम पे जी कोई नहीं आते थे हमारे पास।
और इसमें जो आपका, जो भी आपने शहर में पैसा कमाया, अ, या जो काम करके जो आपने पैसा कमाया, वो आपको मिला? मतलब आपका लॉकडाउन से पहले जो काम था उसका पैसा मिला या नहीं मिला, और आपके गांव के बाकी लोगों को मिला या नहीं मिला?
वो पैसा तो जी जैसे हम लोग यहाँ 40 दिन जो यही लॉकडाउन में रहे,
हम्म।
तो हफ्ते में खर्ची लिया 1000-1500 रुपये मालिक देता था।
हम्म।
तो हफ्ते में ख़त्म हो जाते थे वो पैसे।
हम्म।
40 दिन में 6-7 हफ्ते पड़े,
हम्म।
उसी में हमारा पेमेंट बराबर हो गया। फिर उसके बाद पता मतलब जब पेमेंट का टाइम आया तो पता चला कि वो पैसा जितना था वो पेमेंट मतलब खर्ची में ही बराबर हो गया।
तो मतलब मिला ही नहीं, मतलब
तो
खत्म हो
पेमेंट तो
गया?
हमारा कुछ भी।
हम्म।
हाँ हाँ।
तो अच्छा, और चलो ये तो खैर तब की कहानी थी, अब तो हो गए कुछ महीने हो गए अब इस बात को। तो अब आप अब आप वापस काम पर आ गए हैं,
हाँ जी।
और और कैसे आए, मतलब आपको कैसे मिला काम, और फिर वापस आप शहर भी वापस कैसे आए? अभी भी बसें वगैरह तो कम ही चल रही हैं।
हमको जी हो गए 3 महीने हो गए जी आए हुए यहाँ पे।
3 महीने हो गए आए, ओके।
हाँ जी।
आपको किसने बुलाया शहर में अभी आपके
शहर में
काम?
जी हमने खुद फोन लगाया था, जहाँ हम लोग काम करते थे ना स्कूल में। तो
हम्म।
घर पे कोई काम वाम कुछ था नहीं,
हम्म।
पैसे वैसे भी नहीं थे, कोई रोजगार भी नहीं है घर पे।
हम्म।
तो हमने खुद फ़ोन लगाया था यहाँ अपने मालिक को कि सर हम आ जाए, काम अगर स्टार्ट हो गया तो हम आ जाते हैं।
हम्म।
उन्होंने बोला ठीक है आ जाओ। तो फिर हम लोग, उन्हीं ने हमारी टिकट भी बना दी थी मालिक ने।
हम्म।
तो फिर ट्रेन से आए थे हम लोग।
अच्छा, ट्रेन से आए थे, ट्रेन चल गई थी तब तक? हाँ,
हाँ जी।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल। और अभी अभी काम कैसा चल रहा है साइट पर?
अभी बढ़िया, काम तो बढ़िया चल रहा है जी। वही 6-7 बजे तक 1-2 घंटा नाइट भी कर लेते हैं। और
हम्म।
8 से 5 तक अपना डे का ड्यूटी होता है, और 7 बजे 8 बजे तक कर लेते हैं, 2-3 घंटा नाइट भी कर लगा लेते हैं।
हम्म।
तो काम तो अभी सही चल रहा है।
अच्छा, तो अभी तो आप साइट पर ही हैं, आपकी आवाज भी आ रही है साइट पे पीछे पीछे। बढ़िया। और एक और बात बताइए, अभी क्या, मैंने तो, आपने जब कैमरा घुमाया किसी ने भी मास्क तो पहन नहीं रखा, तो क्या मतलब ऐसा कुछ मालिक या सरकार ने कुछ बोला है ऐसा कि मास्क वास्क पहन के रहें, कोरोना से बचें? वो कैसे चलेगा फिर?
हाँ जी, मास्क हम रखे हैं, अभी निकाल लिए थे सर, मास्क लगा के
ये जेब
लगा
में
लेते
संभाल
हैं।
के रखा हुआ है तुमने मास्क, बिल्कुल बढ़िया तरीके से।
मास्क तो अपना काम करते हैं इस टाइम पे, तो इस टाइम पे निकाल लेते हैं, उस टाइम पे भी लगा के रखते हैं। जैसे साइड से बाहर जाते हैं मार्केटिंग में, बाहर
राइट
निकलेंगे तो मास्क के नहीं जाते हैं।
सो चलिए, शुक्रिया सरमन जी। मैं आपका शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ। मैं गायत्री जी से कुछ सवाल पूछना चाहता था, बड़ा अच्छा लगा आपसे बात करके। मैं फिर से आऊँगा आपके पास। आप कॉल बनाए रखिएगा, कॉल 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 मत काटिएगा, ठीक है?
ओके सर।
So, Gayatri, again, welcome. We've seen that migrant labor is an integral part of society. Uh, Clearly, there are industries which are dependent on people migrating for jobs and migrating back after that job is done. So, what does that mean for us? Like, what does that mean in the context of normalization? How do you see this working? Knowing what we know now, the risks um, with migration and with COVID and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say, Amit, that this entire pandemic and ensuing lockdowns have been a major eye-opener for all of us, not just ordinary citizens, but, corporates, philanthropic organizations, NGOs, that, clearly what we're doing is not enough, and it's not cutting it, and we need to do more. So, in terms of normalization, we like to think of it at Godrej as building back better, creating a better normal rather than just a new one. That the whatever got us here is not going to get us any further. And so, it gave us an opportunity as a business, especially Godrej Properties, which is a real estate developer, to really sit back and sort of take a hard look at our practices and our value chain and our ecosystem and say, okay, where can we really make a difference, having witnessed what we did, hearing firsthand from Sarman ji about how he had to walk back and so on. What do we do as companies and as responsible businesses to ensure that if nothing else, at least within our ecosystem, things like this don't happen again, or they aren't as intense in their sort of negative impact as what we saw. So, in that spirit, I mean, at Godrej Properties, we've been working on a number of entitlements programs for construction workers for a couple of years now. And, over the past 24 months, this predates the pandemic. Over the past 24 months have, successfully registered over 13,000 construction workers on our sites and outside our sites with the Board of Construction Welfare, and enabled them to access their entitlements and various schemes that would ensure that they and their families have a safety net, whether it's in terms of scholarships for their kids, insurance, accidental cover, subsidy to build a house. The list is really endless. And what changed with the pandemic and moved our thinking to how do we build a better normal was we realized that even within manufacturing, there's a lot. There's a lot of migrant workers. Definitely not the same, amount that we're looking at within industries like construction and textiles. Migrant workers, nevertheless, there are contract workers as well who are in casual employment. So, can we, as responsible businesses, play a catalytic role in ensuring that they at least have some form of social protection, that can help tide over when crises like this happen?
So, I mean, I wanted to just sort of go back to the pandemic once, and this is just a bit of a, I mean, the start of the pandemic rather. This is just a bit of a anecdote, I guess. But I remember once the lockdown and all that started, I got a call from, I think somebody from Jan Sahas, and they were saying that Godrej wants to help us. Godrej wants us to figure out how we can get food at construction sites. And I thought that's a really, it's a very unique moment, at least in my life, where I have never seen a corporate basically say, a big giant corporate like Godrej, like even say that, here we are at this stage, we would like help. And somewhere down the line, civil society was able to actually say, yeah, we can help. It's not like this is rocket science. This is simple stuff. How do you get? So if you can maybe talk us through how that little partnership, very minor partnership, came about. Um, and I really want to tie this back to essentially saying that civil society has a role in securing futures of more people like Sarman, right? I mean, and how does a corporate like yours actually make that happen?
That's a great question. I mean, that I think it's more than, I think civil society has a role that is being so underestimated, and especially through this pandemic. I don't think we've recognized enough that, just how much civil society has got us as a nation through this. It's not just for, workers like Sarman or anyone, or any one of the workers on our sites. It's for big companies like us as well. Ultimately, we are our companies like us who believe themselves to be responsible employers and responsible businesses are able to do these programs because we can partner with civil society. So there's definitely no doubt about that. I mean, to go back to sort of the beginning of the lockdown, I think it was fairly clear to us in Bombay, because Maharashtra locked down a bit earlier than everyone else, that this was going to be big and we had to really prepare ourselves in very little time. So at Godrej Properties, we were fortunate that we were running creches at our sites. And so very early on, I'd say about around the 14th or 13th or 14th of March, we're able to ensure that all of our creche partners close down their creches, but close them down, leaving enough food on the sites for the kids that were dependent on those creches for their daily nutrition, as well as their mothers. And what we tried to do is ensure that our creche partners could buy as much ration as they possibly could for that particular site, because we knew at some point or the other we would need more for our workers as well. So we had this little early advantage. And then, I mean, obviously nobody expected anything like this at the scale that it was. And, needless to say, supply chains and so on were broken at the beginning of the lockdown. So, how to get this volume of food to our sites when, our teams couldn't get onto our sites. And, it was impossible to get, such big quantities of food that we needed. We were very clear at the start that we would procure dry rations and let people cook for themselves and choose what they felt like eating, instead of just, providing, something that, others were willing to cook, that they were willing to bring to our sites. And in this effort, there was really there was only civil society that could respond to this need. And, really hats off to organizations like Jan Sahas, because this was a really large partnership. We have, we've got sites all over the country. We had over 10,000 workers on our sites. And, between Jan Sahas's team and our teams, few on site, and then, those of us who weren't, it was pretty much around the clock, prepare to try and get provisions to these sites. And, the Jan Sahas team has really worked through nights to do this and, ensure the well-being of our workers. But, like I said, none of this would have been possible anywhere on our sites, with our communities, any of the relief work that we saw without civil society.
That's incredible. And I mean, I can't get this example out of my head in terms of, just two people being able to talk to each other and say, I need help, and the other one saying, I'm going to be there to help.
I mean, it was a natural, given these are our partners, right? It seemed like the right thing to do, is to pick up the phone and call up partners, because we knew we'd never be able to do it on our own. And just to add on, we'd been working with Jan Sahas before, but, through this, because we were doing this in Delhi, amongst other sites, through this grew a really phenomenal partnership with the Delhi government as well. Because the Delhi government, because of this, knew that we were doing this kind of work, and then realized that there was a big need for construction workers to be registered with the Board of Construction Welfare, so that they could access emergency relief funds, and actually opened out a window for that to happen because of the work that Jan Sahas was doing.
Correct. No, that's incredible. Thanks, Gayatri. I'm gonna come back to you in a bit, but मुझे सरमन जी से एक दो सवाल पूछने थे. अगर सरमन जी अपना वीडियो ऑन करें तो मैं उनसे एक ही सवाल पूछना चाहता हूँ बेसिकली. आपको ऐसा लगता है कि ऐसी कोई एक दो चीजें की जा सकती थी जिससे आपके लिए ये इजी हो जाता, ये पूरा ट्रांजिशन, ये लॉकडाउन, ये वापस जाना वापस आना, कुछ ऐसा किया जा सकता था कि आपके लिए ये आसान होता थोड़ा, और आपके साथियों के लिए?
अच्छा, हाँ ऐसा तो हो सकता था अगर अगर हमारे मालिक भी सहायता करता है यहाँ से. हम लोग वो उस टाइम पे लॉकडाउन में जो रास्ते में चल रहे थे, कलेक्टेड जो होता है ना यहाँ का गौतम बुद्ध नगर का, वहाँ तक हम लोग पहुँच गए थे. अंदर में भी हम लोग गए तो वहाँ से हम लोग को भगा दिए. वहाँ का भी हमने वीडियो जो है शायद भाई साहब उनको भेजा था कि हम लोग कलेक्टेड में भी है, यहाँ पे भी कोई नहीं सुन रहा है, और पुलिस वाले जो है ना वहाँ से भी हम लोग को डंडा मार के भगा दिए थे. अगर कोई भी उस टाइम पे अगर मदद करता हमारी तो हम लोग आराम से घर पहुँच जाते.
किस टाइप की मदद करता आपकी कोई? आप किस टाइप की मदद
मदद के कोई अगर रास्ता ही सही रखवा देता तो हम लोग उस जगह पे पहुँच जाते जहाँ पहुँचना चाहते थे. जो हम लोग रात दिन जो 2-3 दिन परेशान हुए हैं, ये परेशान नहीं होना पड़ता हम लोग.
आई थिंक मतलब ठीक बात बोली आपने. आई थिंक इसमें सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम ही ये था कि मदद किससे मांगे और मदद क्या मांगे, वही लोगों को पता नहीं था कि कैसे करा जाए. नहीं, ठीक बोला आपने. और ऑन द इन द सेम लाइंस, गायत्री, what are the, let's say, what are the two things that the industry can do or should be doing or should have done maybe already? And also if you can touch upon the health aspect of this, right? So there's the entire health play which we are not thinking of, I think, as much as we probably should.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of room for us to, as industry at large, construction and otherwise, really to sort of take a good hard look at our social performance, so to speak, within within the broader framework of ESG indicators, and really, understand how we can do better than we've been doing so far. And I'm really happy that there's been a number of initiatives towards this, the Dasra Social Compact, Jan Sahas's Migrants Resilience Collaborative, that have been able to bring people together, not just in terms of funding impactful programs that will create an impact in the lives of a number of people, but also to share learnings and best practices, to run things like a self-assessment tool for your practices with workers and so on, regardless of which industry it is. So I think that it's time that we took that step forward and recognize that it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also good for business, right? Our businesses depend on people being able to be productive and to give their best. And if we can help them do that, then it's a win-win. So I think there's definitely a case for that. I think beyond that, systematically thinking about how we can enhance access to entitlements, because the biggest learning has been through this pandemic, that when we needed emergency cash relief from Board of Construction Welfare, which has these funds, it was nearly impossible to do because workers weren't registered. So how do we fix bits of the system such that they work the way they're intended to? I think without industry taking the lead, it would not happen.
Correct. No, I think those are extremely valid points. In fact, मैं इसी नोट पे, I think, गायत्री आपको और सरमन जी आपको शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहूँगा. So let me contextualize let me try and summarize what I think needs to be said. I think the number one, as you Gayatri said, number one thing to learn from this is social safety net. कभी भी ये पहला पैंडेमिक नहीं है, ये आखिरी पैंडेमिक नहीं होगा, ये पहली इमरजेंसी नहीं है, आखिरी इमरजेंसी नहीं होगी. कभी भी हमें ये नहीं सोचना चाहिए कि वर्कर को सिर्फ आज की तनख्वाह दें या सिर्फ इस महीने की तनख्वाह दें. ये भी हमें सोचना चाहिए कि हो सकता है काम ना हो, जैसे कि इस पैंडेमिक के ड्यूरिंग हुआ. तो कैसे गवर्नमेंट का जो सोशल सिक्योरिटी, सोशल सेफ्टी नेट है, वो कैसे एक्टिवेट हो. आई थिंक दैट्स अ वेरी गुड पॉइंट. दूसरा, आई थिंक टेक अवे, आई थिंक सरमन जी की बात से मुझे ये रियलाइज हुआ है कि एक वो वाला जो पॉइंट होता है कि मैं किसी से मदद मांगूं और वो मुझे मदद कर दे, आई थिंक ये हमने किताबों में ज्यादा पढ़ा है, मूवी में ज्यादा देखा है, बट ये बहुत ही कम रियल लाइफ में देखा है। एंड आई थिंक सरमन जी का एग्जाम्पल लेके अगर मैं ये बोलूं, अगर वो सिर्फ उनको कोई रास्ता ही बता देता तो उनका बहुत सारा टाइम बच जाता, बहुत सारा दिक्कत बच जाती. So I think those are the two main takeaways from my end, is that if somebody asks for help, we should try and find a way to help them. As simple and as simplistic as that sounds. So with that, I will say thank you, to you, Gayatri, and shukriya to you, Sarmanji.
So Sarman is back. There were months of extreme trauma. There was a time where he didn't know what was going to happen to his family, but he's back. We all, as responsible individuals, have to take heart that not only him, but a decent number of people are back at work. But if we stop there, and if we stop getting our concern stops there, it will be disastrous. Because we have to remember that hardworking women and men who saved for future of their children, who worked multiple shifts to make ends meet through honest incomes, are now dependent on donations. Some of them have been able to come back like Sarman, but a lot of them are still dependent on free meals and cash distributions. It has eroded years of savings and self-esteem. As we rebuild and as we plan, it is important to take cognizance of what has been lost by this constituency. And if I have to segue now to the next conversation for which my friends have now joined me, I want to place a thought again as someone who lives in an urban area, and who is at the receiving end and who has really benefited from the services that we have enjoyed from the various people who work for us, also the migrants. We are at the receiving end, and which is the destination for migrants, and therefore there is a danger of viewing them just through one dimension, that of people who work as daily wagers or who provide a service. If we shift the lens and think of the location or the source from which they come, we can begin to comprehend the complexities that cause them to migrate in the first place. To carry this conversation forward, we requested the three friends who've joined us, these wonderful leaders who I have had the privilege of knowing for a couple of years now. And I would like to introduce to you Pallavi Sobti Rajpal, who is Deputy CEO of this fantastic organization called Utthan that works in tribal and coastal region of Gujarat. Mina, who leads Nishtha. That's an organization, fantastic one at that works in extremely difficult realities of 24 Pargana, West Bengal. And Dr. Prakash Tyagi, who leads GRAVIS, again, awe-inspiring work of over decades in extremely tough conditions based in the Thar Desert of Rajasthan. The whole purpose of inviting these three wonderful people for a joint conversation is to bring out the importance of the context of individuals to the problems that they're facing. And without me going on, I want to actually begin with Gujarat and Utthan. While Sarman gave us an idea of migrants' lives from, due to interstate migration, what Utthan brings is a lens on the intrastate migration, which is where people travel maybe 20, 30 kilometers a day. Maybe they're not even called migrants in that case, but there's a lot of complexity that lens brings. And Pallavi, with that, I want to welcome you to this conversation. Extremely grateful really to have you here.
Thank you.
But quickly from you, the context, the observations that you would like to share from your location with us.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. Like we said, we have been working with interstate migrants. So I'd like to add to what Naghma said. Apart from the shorter distance migration, we have inter-district migration within Gujarat as well. So the tribal pockets where we work, communities typically are migrating for working in the agriculture and the construction sector. and they do migrate for about 6 months a year. And currently, if we see the our observations are that even in July, a study which we did as part of rapid rural community response to COVID-19, a network of 60 organizations in the country today, we observed that even today 66% households are saying that there is lack of money for food, which is like the most basic thing. We started off, even when we started in April, that was the situation. And even today, 66% is not small. When we talk of losing migrant incomes, what you spoke about, Naghma, earlier, that there has been a huge setback. And even today in July, around 42% people are saying that they're not sure when they'll be able to go back. Because let us remember, these are communities who really depend a lot on migrant income. And even today, like our latest field reports, which our excellent team working on the ground continuously is working with the communities and understanding with the leaders, is that about 70% migrants, the interest migrants to have moved back, gone back to try and find some work, but they are also still facing several issues. One, there is lesser number of days of work which they get. Pehle, what they used to get was about a week continuous work, and now it's about 50%. The wage rates are lower. There is very strict monitoring by the contractors. The hours have become slightly longer. So, and along with this, when we talk of the daily wage workers, which you spoke about, typically in the coastal districts where we work, they migrate. I mean, now we would say whether that's migration or not. But I move, travel almost 15 to 30 kilometers every day to work in the construction or in the agriculture industry in the towns of Bhavnagar district. So even these daily wage workers have slowly gotten back to work in some ways, but the construction industry is very low, and they face the similar issues of lesser days, lower wage rates. So that's all in all. And another important data which we saw was 66% families, Naghma, are still saying that they are fearing. There's fear, there's anxiety, and they don't know how they will sustain their income, and they're continuously talking about this.
No, I was actually going to ask you just that what I'm hearing really is there is a real fear of even the next meal on the table, and income security along with food security are huge burdens on people's minds. Within communities that probably were living in a certain way, this could also have some social there is a response that also happens, right? Because there is a lot of upset, angry people that are there.
Yes. There is, there is fear, there is anxiety, there have been mixed responses. But in our experience, the communities we work with, they have really come together. And it is the village way of life, or little more than, of course, the urban way of life. People do come together. There is a great deal of sensitivity in, how we can ally to, improve the situation. But again, when the resources are limited, the challenges are so difficult. So there is a tendency for, conflicts to arise. So but we started, trying to situation. Yeah, please tell me.
No, I was actually going to ask you the same question. What then has
so what I was trying
done together? Yes.
Yeah, so basically wherever we've been working, the Utthan's core strategy is to develop and capacitate people's institutions. So we support 4 district women's federations which comprise a large number of women, 2,000, 3,000 women. Along with that, there are several village level institutions we promote. For any activity or any kind of issue we try to work on, the key is to bring together a group of people and build a capacity as an institution, so that in times like this, and this is what we really saw, that these institutions which we had provided inputs to over long period of time, these are the institutions which really came up. The Mahila Sangatans, the village development committees comprising of men and women, the panchayats whom we, sometimes there are conflicts also, but a lot of people who are very sensitive. The work which we did with them in the past time, really helped tide over some of the difficulties which the most vulnerable communities were facing. So the sangatans actually really identified people who really were in need of food right at the start. And on the other side, the situation was basically that people were unable to sell their rabi produce. So they also identified, along with the village development communities, women farmers who were finding it difficult to sell their goods, especially single women who didn't even know how they would reach the APMC. There was no clarity. There nobody knows nothing about the MSP. So we tried to combine these two, especially in our relief work. So we sourced the grains from the women farmers, and youth, women from the panchayat, put them into food kits along with several other items. And with all safety practices, we made them available for the most vulnerable at the village level.
So basically,
So
what I'm
tried to reach
hearing
out to about 3,600 such families.
Wow. So what I'm hearing, Pallavi, here is where the different members of the community really came together, identified the most vulnerable. The men and women really worked, whether it's Mahila federations or village committees. They worked together and on a pooling system of sorts help address the needs of the extremely deprived. And that's because
Yes.
the community decided that it will work together. This is really what I'm from you, right? That's quite brilliant. And going forward, Utthan has a plan of leveraging on this. Is there more? Because we do understand that it's a period of where everything has still not settled. Is there anything that you envisage which which will work very well given the amount of planning you're doing right now, or it's just going to be building on this federation collaborative and moving on from there?
Yes. So the very strong field team of Utthan, this model which we demonstrated even during our relief work of a people to people social solidarity enterprise model, we are basically the model really brought out that what we need to strengthen is local supply chains, and which is what women are saying. Okay, why should we have to depend on why should the crop we grow, why should it not that crop be available in the PDS? अगर हमको मकई खाना है, मेरे को जो मकई पसंद है वो मैं जो मीठा मकई उगाती हूँ मुझे वही चाहिए. Why should I get something else? So and this is apply all goods we are talking about. So this is one thing we're trying to really see that what are the ways in which we can strengthen local supply chains, how we can do some kind of collective livelihood initiatives so that at least to start with we can maybe not arrest with at least reduce number of move forward, of course. And one thing we see is that we really need to continue to invest and our time and energies and resources in strengthening people's institutions. And support communities to really access basic entitlements and reliefs announced by the government. Because even the data, I'm not going to give too much detail, but there is still a lot to be done. Even in the Jandhan accounts, we talk about the the agriculture related reliefs. There is lot of gap. So
and we have to
there is an announcement. Yes. And in all of this, there will be surely a need, because we are talking about bringing back dignity and livelihood. But within this, it is really very going to be crucially important to also look at women, at girls, at communities, and overall communities facing discrimination due to caste, class, and religion. And really see how we can,
come back
bring
together.
back these communities. Yes, because we must remember these were already communities who were facing, different kinds of vulnerabilities, and this has added another huge layer.
Thank you.
And for all of this, I'd like to just add one important thing for this. It's really important that the government and the civil society really need to come together. We need to trust. So I think we need to strengthen those partnerships, and we all need to come together in this crisis to see how we can strengthen a lot of the issues we had already been raising for so long. We all know that sustainability has to be the key. So can we just all get back to it and work together?
And solve. No, thank you. That's really brilliant. And you've left us really thinking about, there's no substitute to trust, really, as we navigate probably one of the most difficult times that we've got. And with that, I want to really move over to invite Dr. Prakash into this conversation. And even in the absence of COVID, Dr. Prakash, the entire team of EdelGive, I clearly remember you've always spoken about the need to understand the realities and the context of Thar Desert. And and the fact that we must appreciate the difference that the geography brings to the lives of those people, and how it is different, and we have to appreciate this difference to be able to bring meaningful solutions. But given all of that, during COVID times, I mean, would you just kind of take us through a little bit of what you saw and what kind of effect it had in your area?
Yes, thank you very much for having me in this conversation. It's always a great honor to be in EDGE. And it's really good to be in this important panel discussion that focuses on livelihoods affected by COVID-19. As you just introduced me, Thar Desert is a vast area. And some would not know that Thar Desert is the most densely populated desert ecosystem, not only in India, but worldwide. So this is the desert that really matters. A large number of people live here amid droughts, food insecurity, poverty. And COVID-19, of course, has made big impacts to existing problems to the area. Our organization, GRAVIS, works in the most remote parts of the Thar Desert. And we have been working for a long time. And since the very beginning of the pandemic, we have been interacting with the local communities, gathering evidence, developing collective strategies. I would like to begin with a couple of quotes that come from the communities, which I found very interesting and which would probably help set in the context of my sharing over the next few minutes. I quote from a self-help group leader from Jaisalmer, an elderly woman, who says, this is of course translated in English, for centuries we have been dealing with the droughts. What has helped to deal with droughts is our solidarity, the sense of community. We stand together, we sit and talk together, we share our sorrows and the resources that we have. This disease has taken away the biggest defense from us, the sense of being community. We want to follow the distancing norms because we want to be protected, but we also need to find new ways of being together, which we cannot be. Another quote from Barmaid, from an elderly village development committee member. We keep hearing about the disease, the numbers, which is spreading. We don't know in our community who's ill and who's not, because we are very far from the testing facilities. What we are seeing is increasing poverty and hunger every day. And for that, we don't need any tests. We can clearly see that. So this is what is happening in the Thar Desert. As I said, it's a big area. About 25 million people live in the Thar Desert, out of which 20 million live in the rural areas, which are remote, disconnected. And those are the people who are facing the worst possible consequences of this pandemic. I would partition my thoughts in three areas, which are related to livelihood consequences of COVID-19. Yeah. And some of that will echo with what Pallavi was sharing, because the characteristics of Rajasthan are quite similar to Gujarat. The first one is about the migrant laborers crisis and their issues. We have some 1.4 million migrant laborers either coming back to Rajasthan or leaving the state, going back to their states. And both inbound laborers and outbound laborers had to face severe hardships, as has been the case all over the country. But one of the most striking things is that all inbound laborers are, almost all of them are from the rural areas of Rajasthan, whereas all outbound laborers leaving from Rajasthan were from cities and urban areas. So the outbound migrants were stranded for long periods in shelters in cities, which are usually crowded. So they had big problems of food insecurity, of distancing, of hygiene, of healthcare access. And similarly, the people who came back, they were stranded in cities for some time to health screening to take place and to find transportation, which was disrupted for a long time. But then eventually when they reached their homes, they were literally cashless with no money. And they faced the fear, the stigma from their own families, from their own communities, in addition to the burdens of, economic needs of the families, which are linked with their wages, which they lost. So overall, it was a very difficult scenario for the migrant laborers, both incoming and leaving Rajasthan. A second aspect that came to our attention was this whole dwindling options for local livelihood generation. In a drought-prone area like Rajasthan, there are usually two large components to local rural economy, one being agriculture and the other one being animal husbandry, both extremely disrupted. And Rajasthan and the Thar Desert is basically one crop season, one crop per area. Depends on the Kharif, the monsoon crop. There are usually no second crops in the area because of the rainfall issues. So the hopes were really high in the Kharif season, which is usually between July, August to November, December. Unfortunately, this year was not very bad in terms of rainfall. It was a decent year in terms of the rains that came. But then the problems were there in the context of finding seeds, pesticides, manure, and other materials that are required for the farming. So we fear...
This must have caused a lot of angst, of course. And how did I mean, you were really in the center of it all, Dr. Prakash. You were there, and as terms of mitigation, or in terms of how does recovery even begin from a place like that? Because there's just income gaps, right? There's also health scares. There's lack of addressing any human needs, and then in that environment, how did you or GRAVIS really, address this?
We began in the beginning of the lockdown restrictions in the month of March, and what we were able to do is to do a rapid needs assessment (RNA) of the local communities, which helped us in understanding what are the acute needs and how do we move forward in terms of a long-term rehabilitation interventions. Three areas that we really looked into. One was immediate relief supplies to the families which are extremely disconnected in very far-flung areas. I did mention earlier in my talk that the Thar Desert is an area which is very, very scattered, very, very widespread. Yeah. And what was happening really was that all the relief supplies, including the educational messages and the testing facilities, were confined to either urban areas or to the villages which were in the proximity of the bigger cities or towns. We targeted at the villages, at the communities, at the areas which were very remote, which were very disconnected. So the first part of our work between March, April to May, June was to make family kits available to these families, which was food, dry food, and hygiene supplies. A second part of our mitigation approach was to look at the farming season, about which I was discussing recently, and to ensure that the smallest farmers, the neediest farmers who live in great poverty, would have the water supplies required for farming, seed, manure, and pesticides. So on that also we did some work. And the third aspect of our work was around the healthcare need, not only focused on COVID-19, which itself is a health problem, but other existing conditions which require, primary and secondary level medical care. So in doing all of this, we were able to reach out to about 150,000 members of human population.
That's incredible.
As well as about 500,000 livestock population.
That's just incredible, Dr. Prakash. The problem itself, what you've been able to do, and given your context again, it adds the complexity that you have had to deal with while you were figuring that out. I think that's quite incredible. And if I may just also with this thought move to the other side, really. I mean, from Rajasthan, I would actually move to West Bengal, in Chobis Pargana, where Nishtha operates. And Chobis Pargana is one of the largest districts in West Bengal. And the realities of that part of India are probably unknown to many, many people. For our listeners, I'm just going to provide a little context. This is an area, because of the way it's placed, highly prone to cyclones, but still suffering from water availability because of limited sweet water that is available. And COVID was a huge, huge blow. But over COVID, they also saw Amphan cyclone that caused incredible devastation. In some pockets of Chobis Pargana, there was not a tree, remaining. Houses were flattened. People lost not only their incomes in this time, but have also lost in wealth and basic shelter over their heads. And in this highly vulnerable area, there is an additional layer of vulnerability that women face. Incredible amount of violence against women and also being prone to be trafficked. We understood and heard from Nishtha a couple of years ago now. We've been interacting with them. It is one of the hardest work that we have seen, and Mina Di here is representing how it was from that angle. From there. And Mina Di, I want to quickly ask you, because we are also running out of time, but in this disastrous lockdown phase, it is very difficult what has happened. Can you tell us from your lens what Nishtha saw and how it worked out?
Actually, this disastrous lockdown phase has taken a toll since the end of March on the livelihood of the rural people of West Bengal. Almost 1 out of 6 people in West Bengal have lost their job. Now they have no income, they are penniless. COVID and Amphan cyclone have brought terrible condition in the rural areas. People have not only lost their agricultural land, but their production also. And they have lost their, you have told also, they have lost their houses. They have lost their belongings as clothing, beddings, educational materials of children, and kitchen utensils, everything they lost. Almost 10 million people in eastern India suffers a lot due to Amphan, whereas 2.5 million people of the South 24 Parganas only from our district in West Bengal are the worst sufferers. More than, we know everybody that women have a huge contribution in rural economy. More than 85% women are engaged in agriculture and allied sectors like livestock rearing, fishing, horticulture, etc. But they are deprived all sorts of resources and has been always seen and treated as an invisible labor forces. During this lockdown, the violence against women and girl children has increased in many-fold. But it drastically surged after the destruction of super cyclone Amphan. It has been also officially acknowledged in the official sites of West Bengal Commission for Women and Childline, etc. And but our women, the girls group leaders and women's group leaders, they came forward to shape their community, shape their family, shape their husband and their nature. Actually, I have told you that women have a huge contribution in the rural economy. So we have to create facilities, create income opportunities for the huge number of women. Otherwise, we cannot save our community, especially the women and girl children. For this reason, it is important to revive their former livelihood investments like agriculture, horticulture, etc. And we are working with these women groups. We have a strong network of women and girls, and we have very strong leader of this. And they are the real backbone of Nishtha. We are
Mina, what you're saying is that the women who usually are facing the most trauma, they are facing violence as well as threat of trafficking, are the strongest pillar, and they are playing a huge role in the building of communities, whether it is getting Narega or whether it is the tube wells and access to sweet water. That's what you've been saying, right?
I want to say that I want to share a very successful case study here, that we want to create this opportunity for a huge number of women. We have to. For this reason, women came up with a well-knit plan to solve this perennial problem of irrigation. And they mobilized the whole community, sharecroppers, landowners, farmers, and the officers of local administration. Their concerted efforts reached to the higher officials of state government.
Understood.
Has been started.
No.
And it will the more than 2,500 women will be benefited from this, as after completion of this work, they will be able to cultivate 3 to 4 times in this land, in this monocrop land. Not only that, if we replicate this model in different parts of our state and our district, hundreds and hundreds of farmers will be benefited. It is really
that is so nice to hear, Mina Di. That is brilliant to hear. It's a very good thing because we understand. We've been hearing from you all through the cyclone and after that as well on how bad the situation is, and now to hear that there are concerted efforts and women are playing a strong role there is extremely good. And for everyone who is logged on and who's listening here, this is the diversity that we wanted to also bring out. India is a land of unity in diversity, where we have many languages, religions, food, and cultures, one community. If we view any event and the catastrophe with a single lens, we exclude millions in pain. So remembering the context while understanding problems of working people and daily wage earners, it's a consciousness that we have to develop while we think of solutions and we even appreciate solutions. My heartfelt gratitude to all the 3 friends who have joined here, Pallavi, Dr. Prakash, Mina Di. Thank you very much for spending time with us, for bringing your stories to us here. Thank you very much. And with that, I want to segue into the segment 3. And here maybe shift a little bit from the narrative we've been having so far into taking us back to the early stages of pandemic lockdown, where I had conversations with so many well-meaning people who were extremely pained by the deprivation they were seeing. The hunger, loss in jobs was evident, and support came from all ends. I mean, there was generosity pouring in from everywhere. There was a real desire to do something. And at such a time in the pandemic, when we were all very keen on helping, we kind of, I think, there was a danger of us as philanthropists feeling, like we've done our part by engaging in philanthropy. But there are other roles that we have, that of employers, that of, conscious citizens. At such a time in the pandemic, a film was made, which shook many of us up because it questioned us and our role that we have to play in this tragedy. Kirit Khurana's series of Pravasi, Safar and Samvidhan were a much needed shakeup that we all needed. He has won more than 30 awards, including 6 prestigious presidents' national medals and national awards for his films, and chose to bring the spotlight on narratives that we need to see and hear. We also have with him for this conversation Anshu Gupta, a founder and firebrand leader of Gunj, who most of us know. And for years and years, he's been repeatedly saying what a massive disaster we have been sitting on because we don't value human life. Gunj is also one of those organizations that have some extraordinary work spanning over decades, but also during the pandemic. And to lead this conversation is none other than Faye D'Souza, one of the most admired feminist journalists, a personal favorite of mine, who's never shied from speaking of the truth. And I leave you all to enjoy this conversation. But first, let's take a look at what Kirit has brought to us.
हम तो बस प्रवासी हैं, क्या इस देश के वासी हैं? अगर हम नहीं हैं इंसान तो मार दो हमें, दे दो फरमान। खाने को तो कुछ ना मिल पाया, भूख लगी तो डंडा खाया। फासले तय किए हजारों मील के, कुछ साइकिल पर, कुछ पैर नंगे। मरे कई भूख से और कई धूप से, पर हिम्मत ना टूटी बड़ों के झूठ से। बस से भेजकर, रेल से भेजकर, जान खो बैठे रास्ते भूलकर। यहाँ प्रतिमाओं की बड़ी है हस्ती, पर इंसानों की जान है सस्ती। बड़े सपने, अच्छे दिन बतलाए, पर भूख किसी की मिटा ना पाए। चाहिए ना भीख, ना दान, बस ना छीनो आत्मसम्मान। हम तो बस प्रवासी हैं, क्या इस देश के वासी हैं?
Well, good evening and thank you for joining us. This is a really important conversation, and I think it's important because we tend to forget, very quickly what has happened in the recent past, and we're running that risk perhaps in India. My guest today, Anshu Gupta, the founder of Gunj. I've had several conversations with Anshu in the past. We've talked about disasters, we've talked about the work that Gunj is doing and how people across the country can help out. And of course, Kirit Khurana, who is a director and a storyteller. But what these two gentlemen have in common right now are these beautiful films that they both made about the lockdown and about the workers who suffered in that lockdown. I keep saying this because we should never allow ourselves to forget it. COVID as a virus happened to every country in the world. The same virus with the same intensity affected every country in the world. We were the only country who also had a humanitarian crisis running alongside. Nowhere else in the world was such a crisis reported. Not even our poorest neighbors in Asia or Africa or anywhere else in the world did they have something like this. Whether the decision-making was right or wrong is perhaps, investigation for people in establishment. But as citizens, as fellow citizens, did we fail in the job that we had to do for those who work with us, those who work for us, those who work alongside us, those who coexist in our cities? What was that failure? I believe that both of these films ask those questions in a very poignant way. I know that the organizers had some portions of those films ready. If we could play out some of that for our audience who haven't seen it, and then of course you could visit YouTube where the films are both available and you can watch them multiple times as I have. If we can just play out clips of those films, please. Okay, all right. We'll continue with the conversation. Let me just tell our audience then if they want to take a look at it. The film that Kirit Khurana has made is called Pravasi. You can find it on YouTube. And Anshu's film is called Suffer. You can find it on YouTube as well. They're both voiced by Taapsee Pannu. Very, very beautiful films. Thank you both for agreeing to be part of this conversation and for the work that you have done. Kirit, if I may start with you. Obviously, at that time, everybody during the lockdown was trying to deal with what was happening. A lot of people were saying, what can I do? At what point did you decide to use your talents as a storyteller, a filmmaker, to ask those questions? And how did you come about making that film?
Oh, I've been involved with making social films for a long time now. In fact, all the 6 national awards that you mentioned about, are in the zone of social causes, various social causes of child sexual abuse or child, child rights or child labor or whatever. Generally speaking, I think films are a medium by which you can convey a lot of things, and they can create a lot of impact in society. And I've seen that with some of my films in the past. Initially, when the lockdown was there, I felt a great sense of helplessness because unlike other volunteers like Anshu and many other friends of mine who could go out and volunteer, I did not have the means or the wherewithal. I couldn't just go out and volunteer, or I couldn't just be out there on the streets. I didn't know how to go about it, even though people were kind of talking about it on social media and stuff like that. I felt a great sense of helplessness, and I also felt that no matter how much work good Samaritans like Anshu would put in, it would never be enough. I mean, the system had just given way, and it was, like you said, it was unprecedented, and India saw this mass exodus, and those images were absolutely indelible. And I knew that the next thing it would happen was they would pick up some other community or some other distraction and then build a whole story around it to kind of distract from the real issues. So I thought it is important for this to be etched in the memory for a long time. And therefore, I took the most indelible images of the lockdown that we saw, the migrants walking, and I decided to string it together in one narrative and put it together for everybody to see for posterity. Again, I thought that the reach for a short film is limited, so therefore it was important that if a celebrity also endorses the thing or voices the thing, it'll be good for us. The moment I shared it with Taapsee, I made the film and I shared it with Taapsee. I said, "Would you like to voice?" She instantly messaged back, "Sure," she said, "Sure, absolutely, I would love to do this." So it was very compelling, even at the stage where before we actually got it out there. And of course, once Taapsee got on board, the amplification of the whole thing to reach out to about 30-40 million people, and maybe a lot more because it was shared on WhatsApp and social media like big time. So the film actually managed to reach out. The important thing here was also not to take sides. And what I thought was missing, this is a common theme in all the 3 films that we have done, Pravasi, Safar and Samvad, is that what's really missing in the nation is not the divisiveness necessarily, but what is missing is logic, is missing is empathy. And how do you bring empathy to, how do you draw people's attention to a common humanity and a common empathy and say, okay, at least we agree on this. We may not agree on the choice of leaders, or we may not agree on the choice of the decisions they have made, or whatever it may be. But at least we agree that humanity needs to survive, and this what is happening is inhuman. Can we agree on that? And you'd be surprised, Faye, that the entire thing was so well received that nobody, I mean, out of thousands of likes, maybe 10 or 15 or 20 people dislike the videos, which is quite extraordinary for the kind of video with that kind of virality. So it was very satisfying in that sense that across the board, everybody accepted the narrative. And in my own small way, maybe I was able to build some empathy.
What I found fascinating about that video is, and you only realize when you watch it, is that it's in first person. It's the voice of the worker. Right. So is Suffer, but yes. It's the voice of the worker. Yes. And this entire, as being part of the media, the entire system of coverage of that event was sort of a fishbowl coverage, right? There were people watching from the outside. Correct. And we didn't really hear the voices or the point of view, except for maybe some journalists who asked people and they said, "Ha, main yahan se hu, main udhar ja raha hu, I'm walking for this much time, I'm going to walk up to there." but the actual pain and anguish was never tapped into. So it almost feels like we're hearing their voices for the first time. Was that a conscious decision as well, to sort of tap into, what the emotions might be that we really didn't consider up till then?
See, when I write, or when any writer worth his salt writes, essentially you have to write with your heart in your sleeve. You have to feel the emotions, and of course you have to understand that people will watch your video or watch your film coming with their own point of view and their own prejudices and their own mindsets, and it may not even your emotions may not even reach out to them, or it will not even resonate. But to be true to yourself, or to be true, you have maximum reach, and you have maximum possibility of reaching out with your message only when you write with your heart in your sleeve. And I was just thinking about, when I was writing those words, I was just thinking about, what are these guys thinking about? What are they actually thinking? And what is going on in their minds right now? Are we not even the citizens of this country? हम तो बस प्रवासी हैं, क्या इस देश के वासी हैं? We're asking a question. So we're not even saying, you've thrown us, you've done this, you've done that. No, it is just simple asking questions. Do we not deserve basic dignity? Do we not deserve basic decency? Do we not deserve basic? Can you even look at us? And it's the same thing that I resonated so strongly with Anshu's poem when I read it, Kovidi. So when he called me back, he said, wow, I love it. And Anshu said, I said, of course, I would love to do it, because his poem had exactly the same resonance in a different way. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do Suffer, because again, that was again in the first person. And I think, that quality of being the first person, narrating it from the heart. Again, Anshu, obviously being on the field, he has written it with his experience. I've written it sitting in my home, trying to visualize things. But Anshu's poem, he's written it with his experience. He's actually seen it. I've seen it on television. I've not. I mean, of course, I've witnessed people around my neighborhood, but he's actually seen thousands of them.
Yeah. So on that note, let me bring in Anshu. Anshu, thank you for speaking with us. Again, the film that you made called Suffer asks a very important question. It says basically, why did you let this happen? I've built your roads, I've cleaned your home, I've done all of your work, I've built the house that you live in. Why didn't you stop this? Why didn't you let this happen? It's a very sharp question. And I wanted to ask you also, given the work that you do from Google.
So I think in the last few months, I've been talking about it, that as Gunj, or as an individual, or as someone who also has a little bit of kida of journalism and a camera in hand, I've been traveling, and I've been there in almost all the disasters. And when you are in the disasters, you see distress, you see destruction, you see dead bodies, and you capture that. But what I found in March and April, that obviously we were next to the reality. We were getting all kind of news from all across, because we have a pan-India network of, because of our work, because of a very large scale partnership, and obviously immediate action what we wanted to take. But personally, it was somewhere affecting a lot, because the whole question which I was asking, and which I think I've penned down in Safar and in Kovidi, also, that these are the same people because of whom we are sitting in, inside our homes. These are the same people who made houses for us. These are the same people who have been giving us food for decades and for centuries. And what kind of fabric is this in the society, that no one even took a minute to decide? And whatever they added in their life in the last 10 years, 15 years, they were absolutely ready to leave all that. And they started walking. So right from the press wala to the sabji wala to every single support person was walking. I mean, what happened to the topmost leaders, or the industrialists, or the builders, or any kind of person who is sitting with so much of money or power, that they actually didn't trust anyone? So have we really built that kind of society? So to be honest, I also, there was a point, and it's a very emotional part, that I started questioning that what kind of work even we are doing, if we are not able to build that trust with the next door neighbors, despite our all bad intentions and all. I mean, the fact remains that none of the Gunj person really was on the road. Although the fact remains that out of almost 1,000 people, almost 80% people come in that income bracket. But because the fabric was strong, no one even called up to find out whether we are going to pay them salary or not. Because the fabric is strong. But do we have that fabric in the society? Or we will keep having this standard that I want to live and I want other people to survive. Or we will just labeling them migrant laborers. And the way we behaved, I mean, I have been questioning this, that how come the police was not cooperating? What were these people asking for? They just wanted to go home. I mean, we all were safe, we all were secure because we were at home. Nothing else. Or we were at a place where we were feeling secured or loved. I mean, the common sentiment, Faye, I think you must have heard as a journalist many times, कि आप क्यों जा रहे हैं, आप एक normal, I think in a better language you try to ask people, but I have heard it many times कि हम कम से कम वहाँ अपनों के बीच में तो मरेंगे, that we'll die with our own people. It has come to that level, the sentiment, and we are stopping them to do that also. I think obviously it puts a lot of question, it raises a lot of question, and that's how this entire COVID started happening. And then when I saw Pravasi, what a wonderful imagination and presentation, and that's where me and Kirit got into it, and somehow the suffer happened. A whole lot of chain had to happen, but I think in the pro bono time, pro bono type, these are very complicated one. It is Kirit's lot of hard work and perseverance that it happened, to be honest.
I do want to ask you, the topic of this conversation is also about dignity. There's also dignity in justice. And it seems almost as if we have forgotten what happened in March and April and just moved on, like it never happened. There are now newspaper articles saying most of those workers have come back to the cities. People are talking about how the economy is now opening up and we're recovering. It's almost as if it was a bad dream and it didn't happen. Do you believe that we should prevent ourselves as society? Again, I'm not questioning government here, but as society, should we prevent ourselves from forgetting that mistake that we made?
People might not like it, but the fact remains that we are one of the most self-centered society in any case. All the people who were on the road, in any case, were there. It's not that they suddenly came from somewhere. So when you talk about the homeless, when you talk about the rickshaw guys and all that kind of thing, hundreds and thousands of people in every single city, not only in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, we just ignore. So the fact remains that for large number of us, the financially poor rural person doesn't exist. Financially poor urban person we need for our own life as a support person, as the cheap labor. So we can argue that why are you charging 5 rupees or 6 rupees for ironing one cloth? It should be 4 rupees, whatever. I mean, there are cases where people literally ask their full-time, house help to leave. Although the fact remains that house help had a risk from us.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. But because this is how we perceive, this is how we have divided the society in any case. So when in the normal life, we are not worried or careful about the dignity of people, why do we think and how do we think that in disaster, we will be really, really careful about it? That's why I'm talking more about the fabric part of it. That have we really built a society where we respect each other? But we don't. Or we value each other. But we don't. And I'm talking about the majority of it, right? I mean, the pandemic also gave us a very beautiful picture of hundreds and thousands of people who were out on the roads and who were doing their best to make sure that no one dies of hunger. I mean, I know people who were really, running their kitchen with 4 cookers, 5 cookers, getting cookers from neighbors also, cooking at 5:30 in the morning, and then 7 o'clock they were out on the road to give food in whatever way they were able to do that. Even in the lockdown, somehow they were able to manage the packing material. I don't know what kind of pains these people took, and that's why I think people were able to survive. It was largely because of the civil society organization, the NGOs, as earlier one of the earlier speaker also spoke in the other session, and the individuals. You had a mix of it, but yes, one thing which people need to understand, that the words like donor, beneficiary, it is high time that it all this go out. I mean, it's so ironical that every single person who made house for me was on the road as homeless, and the farmers who have been feeding me are in the queue to receive food, and then we call them beneficiary, although we are the constant beneficiaries of
Yes.
that food. So we need to understand that the dignity and value and love. This is the time that we understand and we pay back.
Kirit, in the film Pravasi, you also, I mean, it finally talks about Atma Samman, which is self-respect or dignity, or the lack of it. Do you also agree that we're a selfish, perhaps, society designed, for those who thrive and those who just barely survive, and there's no bridge between the two? Kirit, do we have you?
Sorry. Yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
it's kind of strange when the lockdown happened, and it was something that the world hadn't seen, and everybody was talking about this beginning of this new era, or this new era in humanity will suddenly flower, and all of a sudden all the people who are selfish and who are self-centered and greedy will suddenly vanish from the face of the earth, and it'll give way to gratitude, humanity, and all the virtuous aspects, because people have time to reflect sitting at home. What actually has happened is that demagogues have used this time to pass draconian laws across the world, right? We know that they have used this time because people locked in. They have, in Europe it has happened, in Asia it has happened, that they have used this time and they've taken advantage of the fact that people can't get out of their homes. And so I don't know how this system is going to change, considering the fact that we have issues like global warming, and we will collectively threaten as humanity that we will no longer exist after 100 years. The earth will be there, but we may not be there. It's ridiculous how we are behaving, and it's ridiculous how selfish some of us are, and how we are just so much in self-preservation that we're forgetting that we are basically it's mutually assured destruction that is happening. So it's quite ridiculous what actually is happening. It's unfathomable to a large extent, and purely my films come from there also to some extent.
So we have a question for both of you, but Kirit first. This is a question from Arpita, who says, do you feel that the issues remain the same, or have they grown deeper, and is there any silver lining?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. The kind of people I deal with are all nice people. They are people who respect humanity, who respect the dignity of others. So maybe I'm living in my own echo chamber. I've deleted a lot of friends who have been insensitive, and that's pretty much what happens with a lot of people like us. After a while, it gets so vitriolic, it gets so poisonous that you kind of want to delete individuals out of your life. And so I don't know. I really don't know the answer, Faye. I don't know we are heading in a good space or not. Of course, with Trump going, it's a big relief for me, to be very honest. But there's so many more demagogues that need to fall, and we need to do it quickly because Earth is running out of time. That is what the real challenge is. So I don't know.
Anshu, a question for you. What is your suggestion to government, apart from financial support, for the rehabilitation of workers to prevent this sort of impact in the future? A repeat of what happened during the lockdown.
So the laws certainly need to be in favor of the people, fine, and the industries and all other people need to be answerable that how come it happened, why did they leave people, all this contractual business of hiring people and all that kind of thing. I mean, to be honest, this is how we are exploiting people that way. So I think we certainly need to look into the behavior of a lot of people in this particular pandemic, including the government agencies and other agencies, and find out that what went wrong. I think, Faye, the biggest problem, what has happened, like Kirit, I was also very hopeful in the initial phase, unfortunately, that things will change, people will reflect, people will do something good. But as of now, you see the same way we are operating, the way we were operating earlier. I mean, there's hardly any change.
In
Especially,
fact, if we're talking about writing laws that are pro-worker, governments have actually done the opposite of that.
it has gone wrong that way. It has gone
Yeah.
wrong. So
So
I
the
think
learning has
so.
not
They are
been.
actually coming. They are actually coming in a much more stressed atmosphere, and because they are coming with a lot of issues now, the issue of survival, they will be further exploited, which we see happening now in many other industries, or even on the labor chalks. That way, the negotiations are complete. The language of negotiation is completely changed. That way. So that certainly needs to change, for sure. And government, certainly all the governments. I mean, one thing which we need to understand, that in our life, on any given point, even every inch of the land of this country is actually where we elect 3 to 4 people. वो ग्राम प्रधान to nagar palika person to MLA to MP. So there are 3 4 elected people elected by me in every single inch of space where I live. So I mean, these people are answerable, not only the industry or other people. These people are also answerable for the welfare of the common people of the nation.
Right. Both Kirit and Anshu, thank you so much for speaking with me. I'm told we have run out of time, but I could easily spend another half an hour talking to both of you about the work that you have done and about where each of us could perhaps change within our circle of influence. It's one thing to wait for like bigger, larger change to come in the world and the country, but you can change inside your home. You can change the way you deal with the people who work for you and with you. And that is one step closer. You can set an example. You can maybe help people who work with you understand their rights, which is a huge thing that you can do in this country. You can explain to them that as equal citizens, although we never treat them as equal citizens of this country, they are entitled to rights, they are entitled to certain benefits. And the job that you can do is to explain that to them. We are going to leave you with the Suffer video, which you can see. And like I said, you can access this on YouTube. Once you watch it, you wind up going back to it many times. So take a look at it, and I hope the message gets through, and we can actually begin now to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye. Pleasure.
सुनो, हमने तो कभी नहीं कहा कि जिन मकानों में तुम बसे हो वो हमने बनाए हैं। हमने तो कभी नहीं जताया कि गाड़ियां दौड़ती हैं तुम्हारी जिन सड़कों पर वो हमने बिछाई हैं। हमने तो कभी बोला ही नहीं कि जिस रिक्शा में तुम बैठते हो वो हमारे फेफड़े खींचते हैं। मैं जानता हूं ढूंढ रहे हो मुझे उस बंद नाली को खोलने के लिए, वो फैक्ट्री की बेजान मशीनों के लिए, रात को जागते रहो की आवाज के लिए, गाड़ी पर जमी मिट्टी को धोने के लिए। और मुझे पता है बाबूजी को मेरे हाथ के ही गोभी के पराठे पसंद हैं। तुम्हें बर्तन धोने से कितनी कोफ्त है। हम तो अब भी सोचते हैं फिर जाने क्यों दिया, क्यों छोड़ा सड़कों पर, क्यों बस और ट्रेन बंद थी, लाठियां क्यों चली हम पर, क्यों चले हम हफ्तों तक भूखे प्यासे। हमने तो कभी नहीं कहा कि हम सिर्फ काम पर याद आते हैं। हमने तो ना स्कूल मांगे, ना सड़क, ना गाड़ियां, ना पक्की छत। फिर एक बार इशारे से फोन करके आवाज देकर रुका तो होता इस अनचाहे सफर से पहले।
With that extremely thought-provoking conversation, three of the very important, influential people in our society, Faye closed it with a call to action, really, that we all have to speak and think and include in our lives a conscious level of what we're doing as individuals. But this evening will be incomplete, and I would be remiss if we close it without deliberating very seriously on what we can do at a systemic level. And therefore, it is the right time for me to hand over the mic to Vidya Shah, who's chairman and CEO of EdelGive, to lead us into the finale for the evening, a conversation with Manish Sabharwal and MR Rangaswamy. Welcome, Vidya, Manish, and MR, and I will take your leave.
Thank you, Naghma, and welcome again, dear friends, to Edge 2020. I'm really excited to have this conversation this evening with my two guests, MR Rangaswamy and Manish Sabharwal. Before I jump into introducing them, let me provide a few opening comments on our topic du jour. In search of new lives, rebuilding together. We will be exploring a few themes within the context of livelihoods, not only those around access to employment, but also around dignified, resilient, and sustainable livelihood. I will focus our conversation on people living in vulnerable communities without the same access to education, employability, and other opportunities that most of us in the audience have. We all know that nothing in development is simple. Everything is interconnected. There is a complex web of issues that we as civil society actors and funders can address. As we have heard from our speakers before, there are possibilities that we can focus on with a long-term view to solving this problem collectively and collaboratively. If you look at the issue through a systems lens, there are many actors who are involved. Government, especially state governments, policymakers and economists, labor itself, employers and industry, civil society, and us ordinary citizens. And the interplay of the issues is fascinating. First, we have labor markets. There is demand-supply disequilibrium. There are more people than jobs. There is space disequilibrium. Jobs are not where people are. There are formal and informal labor markets, and some incentives and regulatory push to more formalization of employment that we are beginning to see. And then we have the whole gamut of labor rights and legislation. Second, we have education and skilling issues. We need to match the skills that employers need with improving the quality of education and vocational training to equip people. And whose responsibility is this really? We've seen many models in the past, nonprofit, industry, government, but nothing that has been game-changing. Third, we have migration and its role. We have the conundrum of people to jobs versus jobs to people, and what does that mean? But we also have issues of identity, rights, and dignity, especially in interstate migration. Our NGO partner, Jan Sahas and Ashif, they eloquently call it Shram Ki Garima. Fourth, we have the impact of technology and the digital economy. How do we leverage technology to connect employers and job seekers? And how do we reimagine the role and rights of labor in the gig economy? Finally, we have the role of capital and access to financing. How do we enable entrepreneurs and small businesses To expand through access to financial services, how do we address the issue of lack of funding? We need more student loans and skilling loans to bridge the access to opportunities. To help me make sense of these tangled issues and chart the role of philanthropy in finding solutions, I'm super honored to have two extraordinary people. I'm going to introduce them properly, no brief introductions here, because I do believe that their journey and their work is fascinating. Let me start with MR. MR Rangaswamy, or MR as he is fondly called, arrived in the United States over 40 years ago with $8 in his pocket as a university student. He participated in the rapid expansion of Silicon Valley during his tenure as an executive at both large and small software companies. But I know him more as a community builder, philanthropist, and eco-warrior with a unique talent for fostering innovation and creating impactful networks. In 1997, he co-founded the Sandhill Group, and as an early angel investor in Silicon Valley, he passionately mentored successful IT startups. His capability to determine which firms had capacity to succeed, as well as his hands-on work with startup principles, created a new model for launching technology startups around the world. In 2007, MR set up the Corporate Eco Forum, an invitation-only membership organization for global 500 companies that demonstrate a serious commitment to environment as a business strategy issue. And in 2012, he founded Indiaspora to unite Indian Americans and to transform their success into meaningful impact in India and on the global stage. Its influence is such that just a year later, Indiaspora hosted the first ever Indian American ball for the President of the United States that saw 1,200 Indian Americans, politicians, policymakers, and other guests celebrate the accomplishments of the 3 million strong Indian American community. MR's SHG Foundation funds a variety of social entrepreneurship organizations around the world, including Agastya, Black Girls Code, and Room to Read. And now Manish Sabarwal, who's the chairman and co-founder of Team Lease Services, India's largest staffing and human capital firm. Team Lease Services offers a range of solutions to over 3,500 employers for their hiring, productivity, and scale challenges, and has hired 17 lakh people over the last 17 years and has more than 2 lakh open jobs every day. One of India's fastest growing employers, Team Lease also operates India's first vocational university and India's fastest growing PPP National Apprenticeship Program. I have known Manish only through his writing in the Indian Express. Writing on a variety of subjects such as education, employment and employability, banking, and macroeconomics, I have hugely admired him not only for his clarity in arguing complex structural issues that plague Indian labor and the economy, but also the positive problem-solving approach he adopts. I remember him writing in one of his pieces that if everybody believed that in the long run we're all dead, we would never sit under trees planted by people who had no chance of sitting under them. In another, he writes, clearly he has a fondness for Keynes, that India's new path involves changing our minds, taking risks that expand individual choice for our workers and farmers, and again citing Keynes's 1942 comment that in the long run, almost anything is possible. Welcome, MR and Manish.
Yeah.
I hope both of you are doing well. I'd like to start with either of you, perhaps MR first, telling us a little bit about yourselves. I know I've given a long introduction, but mainly about how you started and why you do what you do.
Thank you, Vidya, and thank you for those flattering words, and great to be here. I think it's a mutual admiration society. I think you guys at EdelGive Foundation are doing amazing work in this space, so delighted to be here. again, my journey as a philanthropist, I call it, was an accidental one. I never dreamt to be a philanthropist, never wanted to be a philanthropist. But when I started my first network for tech CEOs, this was for the top 100 CEOs in the technology industry, I had a hard time attracting them to come to my event because there were hundreds of conferences of that kind. So I made a decision at that time to say, everybody who comes will have to pay, but also all the profits of the conference would go to nonprofits. And this was a completely new model in the industry, as you know, because always conferences are typically run for profit. This was the first time that something was started where all the monies would be given to nonprofits, but not only that, these nonprofit CEOs would be invited to our event so they can be mentored, advised, and get additional funding from the 100 CEOs who represented the top industry echelons. And so that's how I got in. I did not want to get in. I did not dream of getting in. But once I got in, it was so gratifying to see the results. And so that's kind of how I got in. And I think most people try to get in many different ways, but I was fortunate that mine was an accidental one. Otherwise, I might be still waiting to be a philanthropist. But the journey has been fantastic for the last 25 years because I get to meet so many passionate nonprofits. And my role in that sector has been to find, just like I did when I invest in my angel investments with tech startups, I look for startups in the nonprofit space. That's what excites me the most, is young nonprofits that are maybe a year or two old, that have bold vision, a lot of passion, a lot of conviction, but don't quite haven't figured out how to get there. And that's the segment that I focus on, not the larger ones that have already made it. They're big organizations. So what is appealing to me are the young, vibrant startups that are coming up. So that, and I will speak more about all that a bit later, but I'll turn it over to Manish.
Thanks, Emma. So, historians call things path dependent, right? Where you are or where you're going depends on where you're coming from. And I would submit that it's just three things for me. As a child, I'm born to civil servant parents, born and brought up in Kashmir. You realize early in life that we don't live in an economy, we live in a society. Second, I think I landed for my MBA in August 1994. By September, I was asking myself, these Americans aren't smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? I mean, clearly I can kick their ass individually, but why does Joe Sixpack, who drinks beer and watches college football all day, make $50,000 a year? And why does Ram Barose, who works 18 hours a day, make 50,000 rupees a year? So it was clear to me early in life that the cultural explanations for poverty are at best the soft bigotry of low expectations, and at worst they are racism. So India is not poor because of something Hindus do or something in Indian culture. And I think the third one is obviously team leads. We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for 15 years, but we have only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So we're sort of at the agony and ecstasy of the labor market. And it's clear to me now that, the two most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents wisely and to choose your PIN code wisely. I obviously did that. Anybody watching this did that, but this isn't a problem like cancer or climate change. I think this is a plumbing problem, and that's how I think about it. I get really upset when people sort of view this as a problem like cancer or climate change. It is not a problem like cancer or climate change. It wasn't God's will that it should take 72 years for 1.3 billion Indians to cross the GDP of 66 million Britishers. That was friendly fire. It was regulatory cholesterol. It was some mistakes we made, and we're fixing those mistakes. And I think we can fix them at the intersection of the three people around the table, right? The government has an execution deficit, the private sector has a trust deficit, and many nonprofits have a scale deficit. But we can't solve this problem without all three of us working together. So I think that's my view of the world, that there's no cultural explanations for India's poverty. This is a plumbing problem, and this just needs all three of us to get together and solve it.
Manish, I'd like you to talk a little more about your opening remarks, because one of the title of one of your articles was "Why the God of Jobs Doesn't Smile on India." And I think it is a seminal exploration of the structural causes of unemployment and underemployment in India. And I'd just like you to take us through some of the key arguments you've made, in that article in particular.
Yeah. So actually, my own thinking, all of us sort of grow over time. If I was to rewrite that article, it would be why the god of wages doesn't smile on India. Because I have shifted my own thinking to say that India doesn't have a jobs problem, we have a wages problem. And I think that argument is important from a policy perspective, because if you think India has a jobs problem, then you will throw money from helicopters, you will mandate a 3-day work week, and you will take away people's tractors and give them spoons, right? Because if bhuka nanga pyasa is the problem, then what gyan are you giving me about wages? Get them food and get them. And for a long time, this emergency room sort of doctor saying, well, when the patient is in the ICU, you do triage, you don't tell them to lose weight or quit smoking. And India has been in an emergency room for 50 years. So if the patient comes to the emergency room every day, then somebody's got to get him to quit smoking or, lose weight. So my view of the fact that India's official unemployment rate since independence has stayed between 6 and 9%. And it's not a fudge, but it is a very poor definition of what employment is. So my case is that, look, we have a lot of employed poverty, and that employed poverty is because agriculture is pretty much, you're vela, but you're called employed. 45% of the labor force only generates 14% of GDP. And then in an overlap, 50% of India's labor force is self-employed. But they're not self-employed, they're self-exploiting. But they're officially self-employed. There was this idiot Russian economist called Chainov who convinced Nehru in the 1920s that small farms are viable because you don't have to pay yourself a salary, your kids a salary, your wife a salary, and you don't have to pay rent. And therefore you are viable. So that theory of self-exploitation is what animates most of Indian employment, right? And the two shock absorbers which sustained self-employment for decades in India, farm employment and self-employment, are no longer viable or no longer acceptable to young people. They say, I don't want to self-exploit, so therefore aspirations have gone up. So my case is that unless we formalize, urbanize, industrialize, financialize, and raise human capital, that is how we will raise wages, because productivity of individuals, firms, and regions are what we need to raise. My parents retired to Uttar Pradesh and live in Kanpur. I live in Bangalore and Karnataka. Both have the same GDP, yet in Karnataka, we do it with 1/4 the people. So people in Karnataka, 4 times more productive than people in UP. If you take firms, we just finished an exercise with the World Bank. If you rank the manufacturing companies by size, at the 90th, or the biggest companies and the smallest companies, there's a 24 times difference in productivity. So if you have that much difference in productivity, if you can't pay the wage premium, if you don't pay the wage premium, you'll never be productive. So you're stuck at this low-level equilibrium of 63 million enterprises in India, of which only 1 million pay social security, but only 22,500 companies in India have a paid-up capital of more than 10 crores. And obviously at an individual level. So I think we need to financialize India, which is rate credit to GDP ratio from 50% to 100. We need to urbanize India, as in 52 cities with million people going to 200 cities with million people. We have 600,000 villages. 200,000 of those villages have less than 200 people. So I know this whole debate of take jobs to people or people to jobs. I'm quite clear. In the short run, you can't take jobs to people. You have to bring people to jobs. Obviously, formalizing something that is being tried, and we have been trying between GST, between many things are being done to formalize. Now there's a PMPRY which incentivizes companies to pay social security. There are many levers that we're trying to formalize India by. And obviously, the new education policy is an attempt to sort of reboot human capital, give Purna Swaraj to universities, end the Ayatollahs of education, license Raj. I mean, move to 21st century education, in a world where Google knows everything, knowing is useless. Learning how to learn is the key skill. And the Ayatollahs of education didn't let us innovate in education. So I've stopped viewing this as, I view wages as 5 things over 10 years. Is the only way to solve India's jobs problem. So if you urbanize, formalize, financialize, industrialize, and raise human capital, then you will attack what economists call total factor productivity, or the Solau residue. See, India doesn't have a shortage of land. You can give every Indian household half an acre and fit them into Rajasthan and half of Maharashtra. We don't have enough, we don't have a shortage of labor. We have 200 million people, Vela, calling themselves employed. And we don't have a shortage of capital for the right projects, I believe. I mean, people can feel me counter, but at least my experience as a first generation entrepreneur who raised money is that for the right opportunities with the right team, capital is available. There is a level of regulatory cholesterol we need to reduce. But I think if you shift to saying it's not land, labor, capital, it's how it combines, which is why India is poor. Poverty is about productivity, and we can fix this problem by raising our game in 4 or 5 different areas.
Yeah. Thanks, Manish. That was a really great presentation of really the issues that we're all facing. You are an immigrant in the United States, and for long the US has been considered a mecca for immigration, for migrants. And I think what's also interesting about the US is that it's a very friendly place for intra-country migration as well. People do move around for work quite easily. So what do you think were the structural reasons why the US is so friendly? What are some of the things that the US did right, particularly when it comes to migration within the country?
Yeah, good question. I think the US obviously is a very large country, 3 times the size of India. And also the rules and regulations tend to be more standardized. For example, in India, the whole past of octroi between states and things, there were a lot of inhibitors that were in place in India, but we don't have those inhibitors in the US, right? So you can pick up your bags, you can get in your car, and you can drive 1,000 miles, and you can be in a new state, and pretty much the rules, regulations, everything is pretty much the same. So you didn't have any friction for moving. So I think that was one thing. The second thing, I think, taking a different tack than Manish, is I want to come back to the American dream. I'm not suggesting for a moment India have an Indian dream that mimics the American dream, but the American dream was somewhat as follows for us immigrants who came here. Study hard, get a good education, get a job, work hard, try new things, try impossible things, and you can get to be what you want to be, right? That aspirational tone in the US was one of the main reasons it channeled anyone. You could be a Mexican immigrant. You come in and you can say, I want to be an Olympic athlete. Or you can be an Indian immigrant and you can say, I want to be a tech startup CEO. It allowed all immigrants to create their own American dream in a sense, and then work hard to accomplish it. Now, granted, 99% of the people don't accomplish their dream, but the fact that they're trying, they're working hard, they're reaching that goal, they get ahead of the game. Maybe they don't achieve that end finish line, but even if they get 50, 60, 70% of the way, they've improved themselves, they've improved their family, they've improved their income, right? And so I'm just questioning, should there be an Indian dream that is created? And it's not about making money, it's not about those kind of things, but let's come up with 2 or 3 things in India that creates a dream for the average Indian who's living in a village, or the average person to say, I feel good that I can do certain things, I try to do certain things, and maybe I get halfway there, but at least I've moved in the system. I've moved up, I've done things, I can look back and say, I did so many things. So maybe there's room to create something that's also aspirational, because aspiration a lot of times helps breaking the roadblocks that are there in India today between society, between the corporate system and employees and so forth, right? So maybe, we need to have a discussion. The next event is, what is that dream? And I don't think it, like I said, it should be a monetary dream, or it should be, I bought a house or I own a car, but something aspirational that gives hope and gives motivation and inspires Indians to really get to a point where they themselves are in charge. They're not waiting for a government handout. They're not trying to get others to do things for them. And that's part of the American psyche, is do things yourself. Even if you're getting on welfare or food stamps, those people, you talk to them, they don't want to get those things. They want to be on their own. Their self-esteem is important to them because everyone dreams here that they can be doing things by themselves. So that's just my take on where maybe we can go in the future.
And I think, Manish, you've also sort of, I think, written about this, where you've really spoken about how jobs are somehow not an election issue in India. And there's a huge underinvestment in data as well, right, around jobs and unemployment data, something that I think, the statistics in the West are very telling, and a lot of conversation between government and society actually happens on creation of jobs. So why do we have this very poor data situation? What will it take, for example, to create a social registry of labor or some such thing, unless it already exists, and I don't know, of course.
I mean, I think that all of us have not paid as much attention to the diminishing of human capital within the state, right? I mean, all of us have these conspiracy theories. Everybody tells me RBI is doing this because of that, or the government's doing this because of that. I mean, the government can't wipe its nose once it decides to very often, right? I mean, the brain is not connected to the backbone, and the backbone is not connected to its hands and legs, primarily because of a civil service system which was set up by the British to control the country, right? I mean, I was as somebody born and brought up in Kashmir, I wish Nehru had lost to Patel on Kashmir, but I wish Patel had lost to Nehru on civil service, right? Because Nehru in his autobiography says the Indian civil service is neither Indian nor civil nor a service, right? So the steel frame has become a bit of a steel cage. It's not the 4,700 IAS officers that I'm picking on here. It's the 20 million civil servants in India, who are, I don't think the private sector can substitute for the state. And I know lots of NGOs try to, and good luck to them, and all power to them. But my sense is that there is a particular role for all three players, right? If you get confused about what the Indian state can and cannot do, you will end up running hotels and running airlines without paying attention to primary education and primary healthcare. If you think that the role of the private sector is to substitute for the state, then you won't be very good at productivity, creating jobs, and sort of keeping all your stakeholders happy. And nonprofits, by definition, cannot substitute for the state. So my sense is the reason we have this data problem is common to why we're not able to build roads, or why we're not able to run ESI hospitals well, or why ITIs don't run well. There is no performance management. There's no fear of falling and hope of rising in government. It's very hard to hold them accountable anymore. So, are you there?
Yeah.
Sorry. So my sense is that it's just a diminution. That's just one example. I can give you 20 more examples where we are now trying to raise the human capability of the state, which involves just the plumbing of organization structure, performance management, training, which is just not there. And of course, budgets. I mean, the budget of the Department of Statistics and Program Implementation, which does the NSS survey, is 102 crores. I mean, it should be 2,000 crores. And I think that we're now fixing that, but it used to be 40 crores till a few years ago. So I think that budgets, but of course, just focusing on human capital, and most importantly on performance management. 99.6% of Indian IAS officers are ranked outstanding. That's mathematically impossible. Everybody can't be above average. So, I mean, it just makes no sense. So I think from the basics of sort of introducing the colonel threshold of the army, that you retire at 50 if you're not shortlisted from promotion, I think we should do that for joint secretaries. I think we should enforce a curve where 99% can't be. If you start thinking about the plumbing of the civil services, they're not evil people. They are just responding to the incentives they have. If you change the incentives they face in terms of human capital, right now you treat a Gadha Ghoda equally, right? I mean, it's the Gadha who celebrates and it's the Ghoda who gets frustrated, right? I mean, a brilliant IAS officer who's honest and works very hard gets treated the same as some idiot who's corrupt and does no work. So I think that I see this lens of just the statistics problem as the same problem as why ESI hospitals, despite sitting on 90,000 crores, are not able to provide healthcare, or the 1,400 employment exchanges last year in this country, which gave less jobs to people than a company like me. So I think that this is just the human capital, performance management, and actual resources that the Indian state needs to do less so it can do more in the areas that matter.
Yeah, yeah. And MR, I wanted to turn to you specifically, you know, in the migrants crisis that some of our earlier, you know, panelists and speakers spoke about. So what were the thoughts of, you know, your thoughts? What are the thoughts of your fellow Indian Americans when you saw the migrants crisis unfold in India, you know, those taking the long walk home in search of food, in search of a home, but also actually about dignity and a shred of familiarity. And I know that in diaspora in particular was very impacted and did a lot of work. So if you could talk to us about that?
Yeah, I think this was the one of the times when you kind of see how people react, how society reacts to a crisis that's not in their own place, but somewhere else, far, far away. And the Indian American community really rose up, very positive way to say, hey, look, we see these pictures, we see these videos of people, you know, literally walking hundreds, if not thousands of miles back with no food. And so our community really rallied around helping these people. So we started a program called Chalo Give in the US, both online and offline program, that within 10 days, we raised $1 million. And, you know, over the course of time enabled, you know, 4 or 5 million meals to be given to migrant workers in India. So the community here really stood up and said, we need to help. But, you know, that's only the reacting to a crisis, right? We need to go beyond that. So I think the community here is waiting for what is the next step, right? A lot of these migrants have gone home. It looks like many of them are coming back to the cities again. But the question and debate that we're waiting to see is how many of them want to stay back, can stay back in their home places, and what kind of livelihoods can they get that make any sense to them, right? And so that's the part that we don't have enough information in the US as a community to say, this is how Indian Americans can step up to the next stage, right? We were very active in phase one of just reacting to a crisis, but now in what happens typically in crises is the long-term fades away. You know, the crisis is over, things open up, COVID goes away in a year, and then people all migrate back to the big cities and they're part of the informal sector and life goes on, right? But I don't believe that this inequality can keep going on forever, right? In any country, when inequality gets to be higher and higher, there's going to be a revolution, whether it's the US or India. At some point, people are going to get fed up, right? Right now, I think they're still sustaining themselves, but you know, we don't want any society to reach that breaking point. And so what we are looking for from the US to all of you in India is, what can we do? Because we are well equipped with technology ideas, healthcare ideas, legal ideas. There's so much brain power and talent in the US that is readily accessible to the Indian system if called upon, right? But we need to have that next step of what is the model for India going forward? Do these people stay back where they are, or do they again go to unsustainable jobs in unsustainable cities, living in poverty and facing the same hardship they did? We hope that that doesn't happen, but it looks like from our point of view, it is starting to happen again. So maybe in 2 years, you know, we're back to where we were before COVID. That is our concern. And so maybe, you know, we do need to have another forum of some kind to kind of only discuss what is the new model for India to deal with these people who live today in villages and small towns, and is there a livelihood, is there opportunity, and can they move forward in a different model than the old model? So that's our take on it.
Yeah, I would love for Manish to take this, because I also wanted to ask Manish, how do you create, you know, a team lease or many team leases for 45 crore people or whatever the number is that, you know, we have in terms of people who are either underemployed or need a job?
See, I don't particularly like Karl Marx, but the only quote of his which I use a lot is, philosophers have described the world in thousands of ways. The point, however, is to change it. I think the point he was trying to make is what Avinash Dikshit at Princeton, he's one of my favorite professors, reminds me that life is second best at best. Right? I think nobody disagrees that we should take jobs to people. Nobody disagrees that we should target 10 industries and create them. But I have just come to the conclusion that the role of the state is not to set things on fire. It is to create the conditions for spontaneous combustion. There's a lot of talk right now about why don't you target this industry with this subsidy in Bihar and this one in Odisha, and so you can take the migrants. I mean, we've seen that movie before. We know how it ends. It's quite a horror movie in the sense of us, the government bureaucrats being able to pick winners and losers, or industrial policy working in the way that it does. I think the way we're trying to think about Atmanirbhar Bharat is not to come back to a license Raj. It is just to say, look, India has a large domestic market. Can we tweak your supply chains to do some manufacturing here? We don't define success as 100% of goods being imported. Now, I know some trade economists will have some challenges, but we haven't even done it in the past where we're not China. I mean, there are fixed costs of democracy. So my sense is that I think in the short run, we will not be able to take jobs to people. I mean, and this is true for most parts of the world. I mean, if we study development experience, the notion that Arthur Lewis's sort of Lewisian turning point, that the only way to help farmers is to have less farmers, and wages in an economy don't rise till you move people out to farms, is borne out by China's experience, right? And I'm sick and tired of Stockholm and Finland and Germany. I mean, they have as many people as Chandni Chowk. So there's something we can learn from them, but there's, more we can learn from larger countries who have the complexities that we have. And so I think China's wages did not go up between 1978 and 1998, while they were moving 200 million people off farms. And that was what the Chinese New Year, 250 million used to buy a ticket on that 4-day weekend. And after 1998, when the best friend of labor is a tight labor market, when the labor market started getting tighter, then the Chinese New Year reduced and stuff like that. So I'm a little careful with this whole new model. I think the new model for India is just more urbanization, financialization, less regulatory cholesterol, more freedom for entrepreneurs to be, we should be able to succeed based on the sweat of our brow, the courage in our heart, and the strength of our back, rather than who we know, or being able to do regulatory arbitrage, right? I mean, my parents live in Kanpur. Whenever I go to Kanpur, all the kids come to me and say, oh, let me take you to meet this minister or MLA, I'll get you this contract or something like that, because their role model is Subroto Rai Sahara or Ponti Chadda or some such other idiot who manipulated the government, while I grew up in Bangalore and my role models were Kiran Shaw or Nandan or Azim Premji. And so I think the universe isn't made of atoms, it's made of stories, as Maya Angelou used to say. And I think the stories in Indian entrepreneurship are changing. I think the idea of India is changing. It is contested, and it is contested in a good way. I mean, the idea of India, which Sunil Khilnani wrote, was a very elite idea of India. 25 people having lunch in India International Center qualified as consensus at that point in time. I don't think that's true anymore, and I think that's wonderful. So what people view at some level as is a deepening of democracy. And I don't think there will be one idea for India. We are a continent. And so I think that the direction of travel that we are taking right now, which is don't pick winners or losers, and don't say which one is more important, right? State or center. See, Indira Gandhi in 15 of her speeches said strong states lead to a weak nation. N.T. Ramarao responded saying the central government is a conceptual myth. India is run by its chief minister. Both of them were wrong, right? Both of them were completely wrong. But, last year the central government budget was 29 lakh crores, and now the state government budgets are 34 lakh crores. And 85% of the central government budget is confiscated in salaries, pensions, and interest. But only 50% of state government budgets are. So I think 29 chief ministers matter more than one prime minister for job creation. I agree with that. I think 100 mayors matter more than 29 chief ministers, but we don't have mayors in India. But if you look back in 1924, Jawaharlal Nehru was mayor of Allahabad, Vallabhbhai Patel was the mayor of Ahmedabad, Chittaranjan Das was the mayor of Calcutta, and Rajendra Prasad was the mayor of Patna. I have 5 letters of Jawaharlal Nehru talking about streetlights. I have 10 letters of, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel talking about school teacher absenteeism. So we have to decentralize power, funds, functions, and functionaries from Delhi to state capitals, which I think we have done quite a bit in the last 4 years. And now we have to get it from state capitals to cities and give everybody an equal chance to compete. Obviously, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra will have an unfair advantage. In the next 20 years, they are only 5% of population growth, but 45% of GDP growth.
Yes.
While UP, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Odisha are 40% of population growth, but maybe 15-20% of GDP growth. So I don't know how to make UP a fertile habitat for job creation. But if we, UP exports 20 million people to the south and west of India, I'm not sure that's that horrible in the short run. It's better than them hanging out in UP in my mind, and life is second best at best. I mean, I would be happy if Lucknow could become like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Gurgaon, or Pune, but that's unlikely in the short run.
In fact, you've written recently, and one of the, about how the new reforms around farm labor as well as education are in a sense a method of unlocking land, labor, and capital. And it's one of the few articles where I've seen, the confluence of bringing all these three together. So what made you think about, bring those three elements together? I hadn't seen that before.
But actually, it's a continuation of GST. It's a continuation of a belief that informality is the slavery of the 21st century. It's just informality where a guy is working as hard, but because the firm is not that productive, his wages won't go up. So the difference, as an entrepreneur, you can create two kinds of companies, a baby and a dwarf. Both are small, but one is going to grow. The difference between a baby and a dwarf is not more food. So my sense is that once we start thinking of reforms in terms of productivity, once we start thinking of reforms as freedom, once we start thinking of reforms as sort of a Cambrian explosion of a number of statistically independent, genetically diverse tribes, then you shift away from celebrating MNREGS as a success to saying it's a triage in the emergency room. I mean, if fiscal deficits made countries rich, then no country would be poor. I mean, I'm sick and tired of this whole, we should spend another 10% of GDP. Sure. I mean, are you sure you want to keep stealing from your grandchildren? I mean, all you're doing is just leaving debts. I mean, public debt to GDP is now getting to 80-90%. I mean, I know it's sort of unfashionable in today's world to worry about debt, but I'm not sure it really goes away. So I would submit that once you start thinking of factor markets, then you will do labor reform, you will do education reform, and you will do agriculture reform. And I'd just like to point out, this is after a long time we have done this reform where you punish 10% of the status quo to benefit the 90%. See, it would be foolish for anybody to say that the labor reform, agricultural reform, and education reform doesn't hurt 10% of the labor force, 10% of farmers from Punjab and Haryana, and 10% of educators. But greatest good for the greatest number is what policy should be about, right? And so we've finally taken on vested interests. Now, I'm happy that, labor reform happened with agricultural reform at the same time, because agricultural reform is getting most of the band baja right now in Delhi. But these would not have happened without COVID, right? But they are deeply connected in a sense of it's about freedom, it is about reducing regulatory cholesterol, it's about raising productivity, and it's about the government saying, look, I don't know how to pick winners and losers, but I trust the Cambrian creativity process of millions of entrepreneurs who are hungry and who are willing to take on and create ventures which are well-paying jobs if we get out of the way. The one project which is still pending is the regulatory cholesterol project, right? We put out an infographic, I don't know whether you saw that, there's 69,000 compliances, 6,700 filings, and that changed 8 times last year. How is an entrepreneur expected to keep track of this, crap? I mean, it's just crazy for a small entrepreneur. I have 150 guys in regulatory affairs whose only job is taking care of this regulatory cholesterol. So I think that the direction of travel and reform is moving in the direction of saying that we won't have a Thatcher and Reagan in India. That's just, reform is not going to be a bulb that goes on. It's going to be a gentle sunrise. It's going to be a contested sunrise. And stuff like this agricultural pushback is probably the only way that we'll get people or the hidden constituencies for agriculture to speak up, right? Or labor reform. So I think that the connectivity between productivity of individuals was education reform. Labor reform was about the productivity of enterprises, and agricultural reform was about the productivity of sectors. And there's 2, 3 more reforms, whether it's banking reform, whether it's this compliance reform, whether it's infrastructure reform, and finally the meta reform is civil service reform, all of which I think you will see in the next 12 to 18 months done from this perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, Manish. It's been fascinating, but I'd like to sort of close with just a question to both of you, which is that if you had some advice to give philanthropists at this time as to what they should actually be thinking about doing, what would your advice be? I'd start with MR.
Yeah. So I would say one point I go back to is just my experience in Silicon Valley for the past almost 40 years in the Bay Area. And that is one of the reasons for success in the US has been crazy entrepreneurs coming to the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, money being given to them, and these guys go break all the rules. And in the US, you can get away quite a bit with breaking the rules. For example, Uber started a company. They never went to any city and asked for approval, right? They just broke the rules of the taxi system and so forth. Airbnb did the same thing with the hotels, but going directly to people and saying, hey, rent your homes, right? That kind of stuff would be very hard to do in India, or even thinking of doing that in India, because the government would immediately clamp down and on these kinds of things. In the US, you can litigate or you can ask for forgiveness. It's a different kind of system. So I think that's something to be kept in mind, is can Indian entrepreneurs kind of take that next step somehow and overcome the bureaucratic hurdle or the regulatory cholesterol that Manish talks about somehow in a way that allows them to be more free, to be more creative in breaking rules and regulations, right? In a way that still works for everyone. So for philanthropists, my passion is to start work with young NGOs and young organizations and help them scale, help them get their positioning, framing shape, get their programs launched and executed properly, and to get funding for startups. That's always been my passion. I'd rather fund someone small than something big. And so my thing would be for Indian philanthropists either to start their own as their own baby, or fund a young NGO that's just getting going, that just needs that help, both with money and time, to guide them into a path where they can be scalable and they can actually be much more impactful.
Manish?
So, I mean, I'd be happy to, MR will be happy to hear that, Team Lee's broke about 5,000 rules for our first 10 years why we couldn't go public, and I had 500 court cases. So, that is now acceptable in India, and many people are doing that. I think that old stereotype of a government can shut you down and you have to kowtow, that is not true of India anymore. We could not go public for 10 years because we were doing that, but then we made the rules change, or the rules changed on their own, whichever it is. And, now we are a listed company. So I would say that's happening in 10 industries right now. The transmission, see, India first works in the transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced, and then you somehow change how the law is written. But how it is interpreted, practiced, and enforced has already started changing. As far as for philanthropists, I would just, say, get ready, take more risks. When I landed in the US in 1994, there was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal, which I have cut out and kept, which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which she wrote that, right? Because what's happening in India isn't once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. But there are 300 million people in India who will not read the newspaper that they deliver, or sit in the car that they clean, or send their kids to the school that they help build. And this is a plumbing problem. as I started off with. And the next 25 years in India are going to be completely different from the last 25 years. Not because of the last 5 years, but because of the compounding of each individual reform from 1991. You can't, every individual reform doesn't matter. It's the compounding where we're getting to escape velocity, I think. And, you know, V.S. Naipaul was the first to pick this up in his Million Mutinies Now, you know, that was in the 80s or 90s. But I see that at an economic and political level now. So I am actually truly believe that the next 25 years will be different from the last 25. But it's not about more cooks in the kitchen. It's about a different recipe, which is even what reform has been saying. You know, let's not throw more money at the problem. And we can't offer money, so let's offer change, has been sort of what we're doing in COVID, because I mean, the US is running a fiscal deficit larger than our GDP this year, 3.3 trillion. We can't do that. But so I would say for philanthropists that this is the time, just like we need a more bold and adventurous state, it's the time for a little more risk taking, a little more willingness to say, we're going to prepare for this super cycle of formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital that I think is coming, but we can accelerate it. And I think it's eminently possible for, we just did the math somewhere with the demographics of China and the US. Our grandchildren could live in the world's largest economy at $10,000. And I think but that will need a lot of work. I mean, it won't happen. I mean, the world doesn't move on its own. You have to get every morning and push it. And so if philanthropists can take more risks, but recognize that this is not the India of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. This is a really different India, ready for their boldness and their money, of course.
Thank you so much, Manish. Thank you so much, Emma. It's been just a fascinating conversation. And like, you know, I quoted Manish, who quoted Keynes to say, in the long run, anything is possible. I think I'll close this conversation on that very hopeful note and turn this over back to Naghma. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Welcome.
With that extremely thought-provoking last session, we come to a close of the first evening of EDGE 2020. We truly value the time you have all spent with us, and we also look forward to the feedback from each one of you. So do not hesitate to write into us and tell us what you liked, what would you like to hear more of. We meet again on the 10th of December at 6 p.m., where we will be discussing education. We will start the conversation with having 2 young students join us with their principal, and then the conversation will move forward the way it has today. So looking forward to seeing you again on the 10th. Do not forget to log in, and please send us your views and your feedback through emails or through any of our social media accounts. Thank you very much, and have a great evening and a great week ahead. Thank you.